in art, I would say, spans a good 50 years. I started when I was just a teenager, actually. I started doing Christmas cards for a group of banks that were interested in doing historical Chicago. And so that far back, my interest in Chicago history as an artist was cultivated. My interest in Chicago's historic buildings and the history of Chicago goes back beyond that. My grandfather was Marshall Field's office boy, Marshall Field I. He would often take me to the old Field mansion on Prairie Avenue, where I could just roam at will in the house and up and down the street of these forlorn, deserted, once glorious homes of Chicago's millionaires and founders. That interest got in my blood, to say the least, and it is still a major interest in my life. I think as an artist, I am probably blessed with some of the most wonderful commissions anybody could ever ask for. My commissions often allow me to paint something that I would paint just for my own love and pleasure, joy. Some of my clients, one for example, is the Vanderbilt family, their great estate in Asheville, North Carolina, Biltmore, the largest private home in America, very possibly the largest private home anywhere. And for someone that loves watercolor and historic architecture, this is just a commission made in heaven. Also, I work for the Chicago Convention and Tourism Bureau. I paint contemporary Chicago for them, which is another great love. Again, how could I be so fortunate as to be commissioned at least once a month to paint something of the city that I love so much. The Firehouse Restaurant, part of that great renaissance on South Michigan Prairie and Calumet, Indiana avenues, has a number of my paintings of the area on display. They've asked me to paint the history of that neighborhood, tell the story of that neighborhood, which I love to do, and tell the story in paint. One in particular that I truly enjoyed, they asked me to paint a panorama of Prairie Avenue from 1905 Prairie looking north past 18th Street. Other commissions around the country, music is my hobby, if you'd say I have a hobby, because certainly painting is my hobby. I always say if I retire, I won't do anything else. I'll just continue doing exactly the same thing that I do now. But music is a hobby. I love music. I've always been a devotee of classical music, and I do work for symphony orchestras all over the country. I work for the Philadelphia Orchestra. I do work for the Boston Symphony at Tanglewood. What could be better for an artist whose hobby is music than be commissioned to go and paint the Boston Symphony in their summer home at Tanglewood? Not much, unless it'd be painting the Chicago Symphony and Symphony Center. You know, in a snowfall in the winter on an evening when I used to remember walking up to Orchestra Hall from the Rock Island train station on a Sunday afternoon to go to a concert. Oh, I've done work for the Lyric Opera in Chicago, the San Francisco Opera, and a lot of institutions, colleges around the country. I work for St. Mary's College in South Bend, Dominican University. I've done Christmas cards for Bradley University and the University of Illinois, my own alma mater, which is Notre Dame. I have a very specific thought as to what art should be, what art should do, the role of art. Of course, the role of art to me is to give joy to other people. And I'm talking about art as far as painting, sculpture, three-dimensional work, music, writing, poetry, whatever it might be. It's always been my basic feeling that I was given this ability to represent, create, whatever it might be, to give joy to other people. I've often said that I'm a storyteller with paint. Maybe not so much with words, but with paint. People love to be told some kind of a story, whether it's in words or whatever. I did a picture for myself a couple of years ago, and it was a memory that I had from a Christmas many, many years ago, a Christmas deep in the midst of World War II, a Christmas in the 1940s. And I lived with my grandmother and my great-grandmother at that point, and it was Christmas Eve, and my grandmother had bought a sled for me. And we were walking home from the hardware store on Vincennes Avenue, and I was very unhappy because the sled had wooden runners. And so I painted a picture of the two of us standing out in front of her house at 101st and Vincennes. She was explaining to me that it was war, and steel was used for tanks and ships, not for sled runners. And the next morning when I got up, I found my sled, and she'd cut apart her flour barrel, which is a flour tin, into ribbons and tacked the ribbons onto the runners of my sled. So that's what I painted, and I told that story with paint. I did it for myself because I wanted to recreate that wonderful feeling that I had, and I carried with me for 50 years. Watercolor is my love as a medium. Watercolor, to me, is a very spontaneous, expressive, and a thrilling medium. It's an unforgiving medium. If you make a mistake, it's there to stay, because watercolor is a transparent medium. It's transparent pigment. But I love watercolor. It's challenging, it's thrilling, it's often surprising. Occasionally I get a result that I would have never been able to plan. The recommendation by most people that knew me and loved me was that, why don't you do something besides paint? Why don't you sell gifts? Why don't you do picture framing? Because you won't make a living as an artist. Nobody ever does. So I apprenticed to a picture framing shop at 33rd in Indiana, the oldest one in Chicago. I stayed there for about 3 or 4 months and learned the trade. We now do a couple hundred framing orders a week, so it really did take off. Art should tell you something. It shouldn't criticize you. It shouldn't attempt to really educate you. It should tell you something that might make you happy, make you feel good. I've often said that I'm a storyteller with paint.